Fantastic. So lovely.
Thanks for joining me, guys. I'm going to give you guys just a little rundown of everything that's been going on as far as my group of companies and distilling in Israel. So I made Aliyah from Montreal in July 2014, and a couple of months after arriving in September, I started the Golani Distillery. And over there, our main focus is we're doing two types of whiskeys. We're doing a single malt and a single grain whiskey, which you're going to be seeing more of in London. So there's actually a pallet that's going to leave right after Pesach with some Yerushalmi whiskeys, some Golani whiskeys. So you will have a little bit more for your Kiddushim. And as more barrels come out of our systems, we're going to be able to release slowly more and more. Up until now, we've been keeping most of the product here in Israel. Besides for the whiskey, in Golani, those two types of whiskey, and in Yerushalmi, which is a separate distillery on the outskirts of Jerusalem, where we focus on a peated whiskey. All along, we've been making a couple of gins, as well as Arak and absinthe. This year, I decided, because we're expanding our Golani distillery, so we're going to go, we were working with two stills, pretty small stills, 1,000 liter and a 500 liter still. And we're about to receive another two 1,000 liter still. So I figured it was a good opportunity to move our 500 liter still to a separate location and dedicate it to Pesach production year round. So basically, it means that all of our gins, total three gins, 3 Araks, and about 4 absinthes are all going to be Kosher Le Pesach year round. So by next Pesach, you should probably have some in the UK. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about the process. We just set up here. We got the keys to this place February 22nd. So we were really, really late. We were supposed to have our keys in November, and it got pushed and pushed, and COVID's a great excuse for people to procrastinate. So it took us a little longer than we expected. So we weren't able to ship any product out of Israel, and we were really only able to start shipping product within Israel just under 2 weeks ago. So how do we make a Kosher Le Pesach Gin or Arak or absinthe? So the first thing we need to understand is that gin starts off with a neutral spirit. In most of the world today, the neutral spirit used for gin could be anything from wheat, a grain mix, corn, molasses, beet sugar. So there's all types of alcohol that can be used to make a gin. So taking that into consideration, up until today, even though we weren't kosher for Passover, we were still making our gin from a fermented sugarcane wash. So technically, it could have been Kosher Le Pesach, but we couldn't have gotten permits for that just because it was made right in the middle of a completely chametz whiskey distillery. So I'll explain to you guys a little bit about the process and the reason that you can make gin with all these different bases. I mean, originally, grain base was the standard just because that was the standard for neutral alcohol. Today, you have many options. And when it comes to neutral alcohol, we're talking 96%. What the alcohol is made of is going to have very little influence on the gin. The gin really is going to be flavored through the botanicals that are going to be distilled with this neutral spirit. So that's the reason I was using a sugar cane base from the beginning, because I want to showcase my botanicals and I don't really want my, let's say, my single malt or whatever other base I'm making here to come through in my gin, because making my single malt here is never going to be a neutral spirit. It's always going to have some flavor. And some people may like that. There's nothing wrong with it. But I really wanted my gin and my Arak and my absinthe to be really clean and to really showcase the botanicals. So the process starts with a fermentation of sugar. So we have 1,000-liter fermentation tank here. We're basically going to mix sugar cane with water. We're going to add yeast and nutrients to ferment it. We're going to ferment it for about 3 days. And after 3 days, we're gonna reach about 8% alcohol. Okay, so this is
there a problem with the yeast being chametz?
Is there a problem with yeast? Well, all we need to do, there is a problem with the yeast, but as we know, we all drink plenty of wine on Pesach. So all we really have to do is replace the yeast that we've been using with a Kosher Le Pesach wine yeast in order to ferment. So we're basically swapping out, maybe a standard yeast for something that's more focused towards wine. It's not going to make any big difference in the end flavor, and it's going to make it Kosher Le Pesach. So after we finish our fermentation, the next step is going to be a distillation. So we brought our still over from the other distillery. We koshered it, and we got it ready for Pesach. We basically got it down completely clean to the copper, to the new copper, and then our rabbi came, koshered it, and we started distilling, like I said, about 2 weeks ago. In our first distillation, we have 8% alcohol, 92% water. And the first distillation really is to separate as much alcohol from the water as possible with as little water coming through. So the way that works is that because alcohol boils before water, the alcohol vapors will slowly start to rise when we hit about 76.5 degrees. The alcohol vapors rise, they come down, and right here, they hit a condenser. The condenser, this pipe is going to turn into a coil, and the coil is going through a stream of cold water, which condenses the alcohol vapors back into a liquid, and they will come out right here as alcohol. So the first distillation from those 1,000 liters, we're going to end up with 300 liters of what's called low wines. And those low wines they're basically at around 30% alcohol. They're not made for drinking, but they're ready to be redistilled. So if this was whiskey, we'd redistill it, water it down, put it into a barrel, and put it to rest. With a gin or an Arak or any other botanical flavored spirit, we're going to put those low wines into the still, and then we're going to weigh out whatever botanicals we're going to be using. So I'm just taking you over here to where my botanicals are. So here we have some coriander. We've got all types of juniper and all types of botanicals and spices that we use in our gin. So our gin has our Holy Land gin has 9 botanicals, and we've got some local foraged botanicals like etrog rind, myrtle, and local lavender that we pick from around here. So we're going to add all the botanicals into the still, and we're going to redistill it. And in the second distillation, we're going to divide that distillation into 3 portions called the heads, the hearts, and the tails. In our heads portions, we have some methanol acetone. We got some poisons. We remove that heads portion. It's not, we don't drink it. Next, the heart portion will come out. So on average, a heart portion from 1,000 liters that we started with, the heart portion is going to be roughly about close to 100 liters at about 72% alcohol. So that's really what we're gonna bottle. Okay, and then comes the tails, and the tails are heavy in oils and flavors. It's a little too powerful, a little too potent, off flavors. We're going to continue distilling that, and we're going to put that aside to recycle in the next distillation. So that's how we make our gin. So like you see, from that 1,000 liters, we end up with about 100 liters. We're going to end up diluting it. I'm just showing you guys a little bit of the products up here because everything got shipped out today. So we're diluting it down. We're diluting it down to our gins are 45% alcohol. And here you can see the different botanicals, cinnamon, cardamom, etrog, lavender, angelica root, coriander seed, and black pepper. So that's our regular gin. And then we also do a flavored gin. Color here is 100% natural. The flavored gin is an etrog flavored gin, where we're basically, after the distillation, we're adding back some etrog rind to give it a nice etrog flavor and color, and we're putting a touch of sugar. So this is lower in alcohol. This is 37.5%. It's a little bit sweeter. It's more like an Old Tom. We'll call it an Old Tom style gin. And then we have our Araks and absinthe, which are all anise-based flavored drinks. So that's what we're doing here. I'm happy to answer you guys if anybody has any questions.
So obviously in the market, you'll probably want to make sure that the etrog gets ready for Tu B'Shvat, the etrog gin. So people can have it for Tu B'Shvat.
It's I have to say that it's pretty popular year round, but definitely Tu B'Shvat and even Sukkot. But it's a product. It's a product that we've had for about 3 years now. It's available year round. It's available in London as well. I know that the Grapevine just put a new order in, so I know they sold it out. So, but it's definitely for someone who's looking for something a little sweet. We can say it's almost like a gin liqueur, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Ellie, yes.
When do you think you might be ready to start exporting, or is it going to be a long time? You've got to obviously mature and build up your stock.
Yeah, we put it this way. I think that this year we're going to be exporting to the UK, limited amount, but it's still coming. So figure about 1,000 bottles every 3 months. So no big amounts, but it's still enough that if anybody really wants to taste it and try something, it's available.
Will you let Rabbi Amir know so we can link in with him?
Oh, don't worry. I follow David on Instagram, so I get to see the latest updates. So
the whiskey world and the Grapevine, they're the only ones carrying it right now. It's a small export, so they're just keeping it for themselves until we have more volume.
Another thing, I'm amazed that you can actually produce a peaty whiskey in Jerusalem, because the peaty whiskey we have here mainly comes from the islands off the coast of Scotland, and the reason it's peaty is because of the water. It's to do with the water. So how do you manage to make peaty whiskey in Jerusalem?
So the peatiness actually doesn't come from the water, although there is some water that's going through some peat bogs, but the smoky peatiness that we're tasting is because they dry the barley after malting on a peat fire. So it's actually these days, the world has changed. It's become a small place. So we're actually buying barley that's been dried in Scotland on a peat fire and we're mashing it and distilling it in Jerusalem. But the source of that peat is Speyside peat. So it's really barley that's been dried on Speyside peat. Some of that barley comes from Scotland, and some of that barley comes from Belgium. And we actually are growing our own barley in Israel, and we're about to malt it ourselves and smoke it on some local peat from the Hula Valley. It's not going to be sustainable on any large quantities, but it'll be fun to do.
I can see the Scots trembling in their shoes.
Exactly.
Wonderful, excellent.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, Stephen.
Yes,
Stephen.
yes. When you've done the first fractionate of distillation, the second round, how do you ensure that all the poisonous alcohols have been removed? There's no residue.
So there's a few indicators. The first one is the temperature of the still. So certain compounds are more volatile than ethanol, and they start to evaporate earlier on. So, for example, we said that ethanol starts to evaporate at 76.5. These compounds are more volatile and already within the mid 60s are already starting to come out. So we measure the temperature constantly on the still, so we know where we're holding as far as heat goes. The second indicator is taste and smell. So that's the it's okay for me to just put a drop on my tongue and really be able to decide that. But after a while, once we know our recipes and we see the quantities of heads, we get into a certain routine. We'll do checks all the time, but we already know more or less when to expect our heads cut to finish. Another way to check is with mixing it with water. If it turns white. So there's a lot of different indicators, and it also depends what we're distilling. For example, grapes will have a much higher methanol content than a whiskey, for example. Because of the leaves and the branches that are mixed in usually in wine fermentation. So we start by knowing what we're distilling. Once we know what we're distilling, we know more or less what to expect. And when we know what to expect, we're keeping an eye out and making sure that everything makes sense. The temperature, the smell, the taste, and then the look when we mix it with water.
Okay.
Can I just quickly ask to the tail plate? You said you're using hay. Elaborate a little bit on that, please.
Hold on, I didn't
Sorry,
hear
we
the
missed
question.
that.
There was a bit of an echo.
Hold on a moment. I know the Smiths and Judy want to ask something, but I think there's an echo when I unmute you. So soon you'll be able to ask, but Stephen, ask the question again.
Okay. On the final the portion of distillate, the tail, you said you use that residue for something. Could you elaborate on what use that is, what you can use it for?
Yeah, so we'll say that almost every distillery in the world is recycling that portion. So we basically set it aside. And the next time we do a second distillation, or what we call a spirit run, we're going to add the tails from the previous distillation. Okay, and what that does is those tails or feints are full of essential oils and full of flavors, and it's kind of like a base of flavors. It's almost like a mother dough in a sourdough bread. We keep redistilling that, and over time, what that portion does is it gives us unified flavors, because every run is slightly, very, very slightly different. And having this base going back in every time is giving us that unity over time.
Thank you.
Okay.
David, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Do you have any plans to keep some of your malt whiskey back and age it so that you can have
of course.
a tenure?
Aging in Israel is quite different than it is in Scotland. So, keeping it a long time in Israel is about 10 years. So 10 years of aging in Israel is like 30 to 40 years of aging in Scotland. So we won't have much left in our barrels. So very, very different aging. The Indians and Australians and even the Americans have a lot of experience with hotter climate maturation. And right now, because we're in a first cycle of barrels, all our barrels are mostly first fill, means that the wood is going to have a lot of influence. So we're not pushing much more than 3 years, not because we don't want to, but because we don't want the wood to take over the spirit.
Right.
In our second fill, we're probably going to go closer to 5 years. And in our third fill, we'll get closer to the 8-year. And then at some point when we have some fourth fills, we'll go for 10 and maybe 12 years. But that whiskey is going to be very expensive. It's going to be very old, even though in years it's going to seem, normal. 12 years is what people are expecting. But figure that for a hot climate like Israel, 3 to 4 years is your 12-year-old. That's our 12-year-old product in comparison with the aging in cooler climates. And we don't want to climate control, temperature control, because we need to age in the local ambient temperature.
Okay.
Well, we'll look forward to that.
Yeah.
We'll look forward to it.
So now I'm going to Dan Smith. I'm just unmuting. Let's see how the echo. Let's hope it's not too much of an echo. Yes, Dan.
How did you decide on the shape of your still? Because certainly in whiskey production, it's a bit of an art in terms of a taller still with a taller neck will capture lighter alcohols. A squat still will tend to capture heavier alcohols, and the result can be a different flavor profile. So how do you decide on the shape of your still?
So I decided I wanted a heavy flavor profile for both our Golani and our Yerushalmi spirits. In Golani, we're using an alembic style still, which is going to bring out those heavier flavors. In Yerushalmi, I designed the stills and I built them in the Golan. So we built our own stills, and it's the same story. We short necks, full flavor, and we wanted to get as much of that peat to come through. And as Rabbi Amir said, the product, we're really pleasantly surprised because that bottle hasn't even been 2 years in a barrel. So we're very pleasantly surprised. And I was really hoping to get a heavier flavored whiskey. So we're not really trying to copy anything or, mimic any distilleries. We really just want to do something of our own, something fun, something different. And I from the start, that heavier profile was exactly what I was looking for. There's plenty of light flavored whiskeys available, great ones, from Scotland and other places. I'm looking for people who are looking to explore a little bit deeper, and I'm looking basically for what's called a meteor spirit.
Something with its own character.
Yeah.
Tommy, the water supply is very important. I don't know where you are in the Golan, but do you use spring water or is it rainwater?
So the Golan has the best quality water in Israel. We use a combination of spring and well water from the Eden Spring. So, you know, if anybody's been to Israel, they see the bottled water here is Mei Eden. And that's the same water we use for our whiskey. So water is very important, even though it can be a bit over exaggerated the way it's marketed, but it is important, and we're lucky not to have to treat our water in any way. So right now we're the only distillery in Israel that's using water straight from the source without treating it.
Excellent. Wonderful.
Do you have a visitor center, or?
We do have a visitor center right now in the Golan Heights at the Golani Distillery. And we're in the process of opening one in Jerusalem, and probably moving the distillery to Jerusalem, in Jerusalem. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Amazing. I think my family will have, I'll cause some broigues when I don't see all the family, but visit more the Yerushalmi or Golani Distillery.
You can bring them all along.
Okay then. So really, really appreciate your time. I know it's before Pesach and you're extremely busy, and you especially made up the journey that we'll be able to see you. But David, thank you so much, and we all look forward to trying the product soon, and when coming to Israel, certainly to visiting you and visiting the distillery. But thank you so much. And as you can see, Yom Yerushalayim is the Day of Jerusalem will be one of the days that I have this special whiskey, and I posted it on Instagram a few times, but it's especially there to have some more pictures and more coverage for this really, you know, special distillery and special whiskies and the gins and the etrog liqueurs, which we'll please God all enjoy together properly and speedily soon. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And I'm wishing you all a happy and kosher Pesach.
Thank you.
And only good things.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Very
Okay.
good.
Have a good evening, everyone. And just to remind everyone that we have the music evening tomorrow night at 7:30 with some lovely pieces that will be
Actually,
different songs from a whole array of Chazanim. So you'll really, really enjoy it. Take care.
Thank you, Amir.
Bye-bye.
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 Thank you very much.